Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Multi-Music Technology. Today is another look at an interesting piece of software. This is the Oberheim TVS Pro by GForce. The TVS Pro is an authentic emulation, a modelled, engineered, computerized simulation of the two-voice. The two-voice now, Oberheim released a two-voice back in the 1970s, which was two SEMs side by side. They had this SEM, right? It's almost as if Tom Oberheim invented the perfect synthesizer. This synthesizer expander module, the SEM. It was a compact, square, oddly creamy sort of looking box. It had a couple of oscillators, some modulation, some envelopes, and this filter to die for. And he thought it was so good that he just stuck it in everything. So you had the SEM by itself. You then had an 8-voice. We got 8 of them, plugged them together and make music with that. You had a 4-voice and you had the 2-voice. And he was definitely on to something because that SEM has stood the test of time. It still sounds gorgeous. It still has something about it which nothing else has quite been able to match. And playing with the TVS Pro here, brilliantly modelled by GForce Instruments, I have to say it has something else. Because, here we are again, looking at another software synthesizer, and it's like, oh, another software synthesizer, great. They all just sound fabulous. Really, is there any point in another one? And, you could say the same for hardware synthesizers for that matter. What on earth are we doing? Are we kidding ourselves? We're just going round in circles as perpetual and infinite dimensions of synthesizers that could potentially emerge, all sounding more or less just about the same. There is an argument to be made for that. However, there's something about this which is very different. Because, this conversation comes up a lot, I think, about whether we need more synthesizers, whether one needs another module to put in one's thing. But ultimately, I think what I've found is that different things inspire me differently. It's like if you pick up a different sort of guitar. You play differently, inevitably, because something else is going on. You choose a different guitar pedal, you start to play differently. You choose a different module, you work in some different modulation you've not used before, a different form of sequencer, a different tone of oscillator, and you create differently. Now, of course, we should only have one synthesizer each and be satisfied with that, but that's not our way. And so, taking it as read that that's not our way, then it's an exploration. Life is an exploration into different forms of synthesis, different ways of making those same very familiar sounds. And the TVS Pro is another way of doing that. And the reason that it's different, it all comes down to those SEMs. It's not like using a duophonic synthesizer. It's not like using a monophonic synthesizer for that matter. It's not like using a polyphonic synthesizer. Oberheim did it differently. And the way that these SEMs work together allows you to experience something quite unique, I think. And also it's something desperately old-fashioned, because you can hear, whenever you play it, whenever you pull up a patch, whenever you start to mess with it, you hear Tangerine Dream. You hear old 70s bands playing some kind of wizard bit of keyboard lead. You can hear the arpeggiators or the sequences and the leads and the bass and those bits going on that you would hear in other enormous prog rock bands of the 70s. It is absolutely there. It's gutsy and ballsy. It sounds really like it's resonating in a hall of large crowd performance spaces. It sounds like a 70s record. It really does. And that's not necessarily through some kind of vintageization of it. It's just how it sounds. And when you put a couple of SEMs together, they have this ability to rub off on one another and produce these extraordinary things. But it's not just that. Because the TVS and the TVS Pro was set up in such a way, as all the 4-voice, the 8-voice and the other ones were too, that pushes you into a unique approach. It's very unlike any other synthesizer I think you'll play. And that is what makes it interesting. So yeah. So I think there's a reason for this to exist. Absolutely. And this, my understanding is that this is based on the more recent release, which was in the 2015, 2016, was it? Oh, I can't quite remember. Anyway, a little while ago, just before Tom got his name back, got his brand name back, he started re-releasing some instruments. And one of the ones he released was the TVS Pro. It was an updated version of the original TVS, which essentially meant that the modulation was increased a little bit, the sequencer was much improved, and there was MIDI pumped into it with things like velocity and aftertouch that wasn't there in the original. And so it's that which has been modelled, and that certainly lends something to it. And as far as I could tell, there's no extra shenanigans. It's not suddenly polyphonic, it's not suddenly something else. It absolutely appears to be a TVS Pro, which means it also carries all of its annoyances. How could I possibly say that? How could I possibly say that perhaps Oberheim didn't ace this one? Well, no, they did. I mean, my criticism goes all the way back to the original SEM. There's some difficulties in there. Some decisions that Tom made that you just go, why did you do that? I mean, it's so annoying. Or perhaps that's sacrilege. I don't know, but we will see. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring you in a bit closer. I'll run through, a dozen presets or something to give you an idea of the sort of thing that it sounds like, at least what I like from the main set of presets that's in there. And then I'll take you through the bits so you can see what it is about it that makes it different. I mean, I think you'll hear it almost immediately in the presets. And if you go and download the demo, you can mess around with the exact presets that I'm playing with. I'm not generating my own sounds at this point. But hopefully it will give you a flavour of what it's about. And then hopefully I'll be able to explain some of that in why it is that this interaction is so kind of unique, that it brings out the 70s prog rock keyboard wizard in you. All right then, let's yeah. So the TVS Pro, it's odd and it's interesting, it's fascinating and yet different and slightly confusing. Slightly has an element of baffling about it, which I quite like. I'm quite enjoying sort of picking it apart and finding those little bits and pieces and trying to work out, well, how does that actually work and how do these things relate to each other? Because it's not always entirely clear. Now, to get some things off my chest to start with, I think that essentially the layout for me has caused me a lot of trouble and difficulty. A number of things: the size of the writing, the smallness of the switches. I mean, this is enlarged to cover my entire screen, and it's still difficult to see exactly what these switches do. The positioning of some of the knobs. I mean, obviously this all comes from Oberheim. It's not necessarily GForce's decisions that have done any of this, although there's some of that too, because GForce have brought out all of the elements of the modulation to allow you to fiddle with those, but in doing so have somehow managed to even make it kind of more complicated and more difficult to find your way around. Now, of course, everything takes a little bit of learning, and once you get the hang of it, you know where everything is. There's just conventions here, which, I mean, I guess they're built into the SEM, and perhaps I've just never noticed because I've not spent enough time with one. But there's conventions built in here that you just go, well, why did he do that? Why are the waveforms here and not with the oscillators? I don't understand that. From a Tom Oberheim design point of view, and then from a GForce point of view, why is the LFO rate here and not on the LFO page? There are many things. There are many things which I find slightly baffling. I don't understand why, when you go to the back of the SEM, I'm going to show you this in more detail in a moment, that why that can't be to the side so I can see both these things. Because when I try to allocate modulation to things, I'm not really seeing the result of that. Should I be able to? Does it matter? I mean, in hardware it doesn't matter, but in software you have the opportunity to show flipping everything. So why don't you show everything? So there are some things in here which bug me a little bit. Similarly, there's no sort of animation as far as the modulation is concerned. There's some colouring, which is nice and useful, but there's nothing showing you exactly what's going on. You got no, there's no oscilloscope. There's no movement around the knobs or knob movement to show you that this is happening. There's no lights on the envelopes to show you how far through they are. There's lots of elements that we kind of take for granted in most software synthesizers these days, and most hardware synths for that matter, that just aren't there. Now, in some ways, that's a homage to the original intention and awesomeness of Oberheim, but also it's just a bit of a pain in the ass. And when we do a software emulation of something, we have an opportunity to perhaps fix some of those little annoyances that are difficult to do once the hardware's been baked in. So I just wanted to get that out of the way first, probably with a certain amount of controversy, because of course we would never criticize an Oberheim product. Good Lord, no. And just to throw in as well that I'm, that overall you will see by the end of this review that I thoroughly love this machine. Absolutely, this is a fantastic thing, an absolutely awesome piece of work by GForce and by Oberheim. So nothing of this takes away from that, but they are absolutely allowed to make bad decisions, and bad decisions, in my view, they did make. Anyway, what we should do is we should start an initialize patch, and I'll just take you through the little bits and pieces that are in here, try to get across what really works about this and why it's different, and to give you just a flavour of possibly what it's all about. Should we try that up? Let's try that out. Okay, so we can open up an initialized patch. Which is very simple. So the basic premise is that you have two SEMs. Each SEM has two oscillators and a sneaky third oscillator that we don't like to talk about, hidden behind the scenes. Each SEM has its own filter, which can be morphed from low through notch into a high pass filter, which actually gives it the ability to make sounds you've never quite heard before, or at least nothing else can do, because you kind of have this mix between a low pass and a notch, which brings in these extra harmonics or little fizzy bits which you might not have come across before. So that is really interesting. But otherwise, it is the famous SEM filter. Apparently this is modelled on two different SEM filters, and they sort of brought the best from each, something along those lines, in order to provide it within the GForce instrument. There's no switch to switch between them as far as I know. It is all baked in there somehow, some way. So you have these two oscillators. You've only got two waveforms, sawtooth and pulse, which is a bit on the light side, I have to say. You do have pulse width modulation, you have frequency modulation, you have things like a built-in vibrato, which I think is a brilliant idea. Rather than wasting an LFO to patch it in to do a little bit of vibrato, there's one there already purely for that job, and I really like that greatly. You have two envelopes. One is hardwired into the VCA, and the other one can be directed to whatever you like. Normally it's directed to the filter. So in each SEM you've got this perfect little synthesizer voice. identical on either side. 2 oscillators plus a third, potentially, 2 envelopes and a filter. That's kind of it. Now what GForce have done has opened up access to the modulation behind the panel. So in the hardware you couldn't flip the panel over to get to that, but you can in software. So I press this little button here and I get to the third VCO, which is here, which was previously just used really for modulation, although you can use it for melody as well. It has a lot of buttons on it which are too small to read, at least from my eyes. And now we've got the LFO. LFO1 it's called, sort of quite optimistically, as if there might be another LFO at some point, but as far as I know there isn't. No, there's just the one. But we do have more wave shapes than the original. The original just, I think, had square and triangle, whereas this has got noise and signs and bits and pieces as well. You've then got this velocity section where you can allocate the velocity of your keyboard to various things, whether it's cutoff, resonance, the type of filter that it is, which is quite interesting. You can patch it into controlling the modulators and the position of the modulators, or the envelopes, the height of the envelopes, or the waveform of the VCO itself. So there's quite a lot you can do with velocity directly on the panel, which you wouldn't normally think of. You might map that on other synths, but this is telling you, no, do this. Do it straight into the waveform. So maybe we'll have a look at that. At the bottom you've got filter tracking from the keyboard, and you've got aftertouch as well, which can be allocated to all sorts of different things. The second SEM is identical. They are the same. They have all the same stuff. Absolutely identical. And that is what is really interesting, how that these are sort of separate entities rather than being a couple of different voices following all the same bits and pieces. These are completely independent. So each oscillator can be on something different. Each voice can be on something different filter settings, different modulation settings, and that creates a very dynamic, very changing, very interesting little synthesizer. There's a couple of other things that make this quite remarkable. The first one is the sequencer. Now the sequencer can be tied to either SEM or both SEMs, or one SEM or no SEMs, and it can be triggered by the keyboard or it can be running all the time. And it's this combination of sort of lead notes or drone notes and sequence notes that really, I think, defines the TVS Pro. It's what you hear a lot in Tangerine Dream records and other similar synthesizer stuff, where you've got something going on, which I don't have here at the moment. You have this sequence going on with this other thing going at the same time, and it's that combination is really fascinating. It is like having 2 synths. It's like having a stack of synths, but you're playing around with it within one, so you get this kind of cross going over where you perhaps accidentally trigger something you weren't supposed to, and the two are kind of riffing off each other to some degree, and that is a wonderful place to play. And then perhaps the thing that really nails it is this weird box down here. Doesn't look like it has any place within the synthesizer as a whole, doesn't look like it should be there, but the TVS Pro mode is what roots and defines the architecture that this is following. So you can either have things triggered from the keyboard, you can have things triggered from the sequencer, or you can have them mixed. And it's that combination, that strange rerouting of stuff, that builds in this extra layer of inspirational play that wouldn't otherwise exist within a 2-voice synthesizer. It's almost as if Oberheim sat down and said, you know, this is going to be different. This is not going to work like normal synthesizers. You're going to have to think about this. You're going to have to start routing where you want your voices to go. I mean, sure, you know, the CS80 has got a whole pack of voices slapped in the back with one control out the front. No. We don't want that. We want controls for every voice individually. That is definitely what defined Oberheim in the early days, with their 8 voice, all the way from the SEM all the way up to the 8 voices of this stuff. It's really quite extraordinary. But what the 2-voice does is focuses that down into a place where you can be creative and musical without being completely lost in the enormity of an 8-voice or even a 4-voice. The 2 voices is almost like the sweet spot that makes it a lead plus, a lead deluxe, a bass with more kind of synthesizer. And that, I think, encapsulates it pretty nicely. And then what else you got? You've got some effects at the end. Yeah, nobody cares about those, but they're great and super and wonderful and always good. So let's build just a little patch from our initiate patch, just to show you how things work. So the oscillators to start with. So you have quite a clever little nuance to how you handle the oscillator knobs here. If you drag on the outside, it's kind of coarse tuning. If you drag on the inside, it's fine tuning. Now, see, clever. If you do it with your right button, mouse button, it's semitones. That's a really nice, helpful touch. I like that a lot. And those knobs are good. They're a good size. You can see them. You know what's going on. Not so much for the other knobs, I have to say. So you have two oscillators that can work together. Now, of course, I can't hear the second oscillator because I haven't turned up the waveform. Where's the waveform? I don't know. Where's the waveform? Tom, where's the waveform? How do you turn the oscillators up? Oh, apparently in the filter. That's where you do it. This is one of the things that annoys me greatly. I mean, it doesn't need to annoy me. I just need to learn it and then I can get on with it. But even now, after having played it solidly for a few hours before making this video, I still mess up and still can't work out where do I get the waveforms from? Right, they're down here. This section here. This section here. Underneath the filter, in the filter section, it's not labelled as mixer or anything helpful like that. No. You've just got this row of 3 knobs, and what it does, it allows you to move either from sawtooth on one side, pulse on the other. So if I use VCO1, which is the current one we can hear, it's currently all the way over to saw. It will then get quieter. It doesn't morph between the two waveforms, sadly. You're just setting the level. So it's a mixer, damn it. It's a mixer. So you're setting the level, and then you can go all the way around to pulse on the other side, like that. So it allows you to set the level of each oscillator, yeah, which is nice. But, I mean, it would be enormously helpful if it was just in a mixer section where you could do that. And maybe you could swap waveform somewhere else. But I don't suppose GForce's remit is to redesign the TVS Pro on behalf of Oberheim. But it's just one of those things that I think is really odd to have the waveform mixing here in the filter. It's just odd, that's all I'm saying. So if I want to hear VCO2, I have to adjust the knob within the filter section. There it is, and I did detune it a little bit. And now I've got 2 notes happening. Like I say, there's no false polyphony, they've just got 2 notes. The way it's set up at the moment is that Sem1 has priority. So it will always play Sem1 unless that note's down. Then it will play Sem2. But you can set that up in different ways, which I'll show you in a minute. So the oscillators are independent. So you can set them up however you wish. So on sawtooth, the pulse width has nothing to do with it. If you whack them over onto the pulse, I've then got individual pulse width modulation on each oscillator. Which is nice. In the modulation section for these 2 oscillators, again, independently, you can either modulate the frequency or the pulse wave. Pulse wave only relevant if you've got the pulse wave loaded, yeah? So where does the modulation come from? If we put it into frequency, we will see. So you have this three-way switch here. You can change whether you want the modulation to come from the envelope, from VCO3 or the LFO. So VCO3 is operating like a modulator, which is what it does most of the time. You can stack up 3 oscillators if you want it to sound a bit more Moog-like, but more often than not, you're going to be using that as a modulator. So I'm using it as a... I'm using the envelope to modulate the pitch at the moment, but oscillator 1 takes its modulation from envelope 1, which is also controlling the VCA. So that's not entirely helpful. That is, I mean, you can hear that it's there. But it's obviously following the shape of the volume as well. Oscillator 2 can take the modulation from envelope 2. Fascinating, I'm sure. If we swapped into VCO3, and I'm going to take VCO2 out of it at the moment. Now we have no real control over VCO3 here. Other than swapping between its waveform or its noise output. But if we set that on nothing for the moment, in order to use that modulation, we're going to have to go over to the second page and start adjusting things. And so using VCO3 you can get some interesting FM sort of tones out of it, because this is an audio oscillator. It can either be a waveform, sine, saw or square, or it can be a noise source. And back onto the main page, I can decide whether I want that to be mixed in or not. I think it's an acquired taste, but that's what you have. Alternatively, there's the LFO, which is a bit more normal. So the LFO rate is here. And on the original, that's pretty much all you would get. Whereas with GForce, we have this access to the different waveforms, a bit of retriggering, and also a delayed intro. So with the LFO and with VCO3 you can do some interesting FM tones, you can start to shift pulse width modulation about to give it some gooiness, you can start to shift the frequencies around to shift between harmonics and different ways of detuning, if you so wish. However, I would like to point out that there's also this vibrato LFO right down here. So if you're after just that simple kind of thing, you can just pull that in. And you can set whether that's going to both SEMs or not. So that deals with both the oscillators as opposed to individually like the LFO would. So we've come all this way.
So the filter has lots of opportunities for modulation. You've got the envelope, that's what I've got set up here. You can also put that to VCO3, which is currently set to noise. Or to LFO1. Now I suppose one limitation we have here is that it can only handle one modulation source at a time, so envelope, VCO3 or LFO, not all three at once or any combination, so you lose your envelope as soon as you want to plug in some other form of modulation, which is a shame. I think mostly in filters these days we tend to become accustomed of having a couple of opportunities to modulate the cutoff, usually filter and LFO, so you can define a bit of sculpting while at the same time having that generally changed over time, which we can't do here. Interestingly, on the envelopes, is it interesting? I don't know. They're not ADSR, they're ADSD. So the decay on the envelope also acts as the release. So they are the same. Let's bring the notch in, because you can hear how that's different. So that's low pass, through to notch, through to high pass. So that, more or less, is essentially what you get in one SEM. It's not a lot. Although it's pretty juicy on its own. That's 3 oscillators. If I bring them all to sawtooth. is quite interesting when you start to introduce a little bit of notch compared to the filter by itself, just a low pass. Bring that notch back in. Brings in this additional fizz, which is very, very cool. Let's add some reverb, some delay maybe. In terms of modulation of the mode, you can do that through velocity. I don't think you can do that anywhere else. I think velocity is the only way. So no, I don't think you can do it there either. Oh yes, you can. Here, mode. So we go back to here, put that down to low pass. The harder I play, the higher the filter in terms of mode. See, that's really interesting. If I push that the other way, then it's a high pass until I press hard, then it becomes a low pass. I think I need to whack that up there. Yeah, that's interesting. This is again what I say about the lack of animation. I kind of really like to see what's happening here, as opposed to having to just hear it. Because visual confirmation is really useful, particularly in software. And of course, you can assign aftertouch to different things, like, oh, I don't even know, envelope 2, no, aftertouch. Oh no, that's here, look. Put the destination to the filter or the amp. If we stick it into the filter, we like that. So I think I've somewhat successfully, after a bit of a shaky start, got us from some basic waveforms through to something which just sounds flipping amazing. You know, in a standard old school sawtooth kind of way, which is what I like. So there's nothing massively remarkable going on, just good old fashioned waveforms and effects. Right, so that's one. Let's bring the second one in. So for that we're going to need to change our mode here. Again, I'll come to this a bit more in a minute. Let's go for unison. So now we've got keyboard just going to both of the stems. So far we've had 3 waveforms. If I bring in the other oscillator on the second stem and the other oscillator and VCO3, I should now have 6 oscillators all running on that same note. course what you get, because these expanders are independent of one another, you've got two filters, one for each voice, doing its own thing, not globally controlled. So if we just set a note going, I can then control these two completely independently. And the interesting thing I can do is I can pan the oscillators different sides, pan the stems rather. That's lovely. I could make the second stem pulse wave. I mean, the gutsiness that's within here is quite extraordinary. It creates this ball of warm energy, which then just wants to kind of empty itself upon you. And of course you have these two different envelopes, two different filters, and everything is reacting slightly differently. Now of course you can get around this. It does have a group function. It has a group and an offset function. And these two are very similar but slightly different. So I can press the group button in the middle, and this now means that whatever I do on one SEM happens to the other. And kind of in unison, so they have the same value whatever I move it to. So if I move the cutoff, for instance, you see the two are different at the moment. As I move this, they then jump together, so they're moving together. Like that, which is really nice. Now weirdly, that doesn't work via MIDI. If I have this MIDI patch, as I have these four knobs mapped into the filters on both sides, these are still independent. They've not been tied together as far as MIDI is concerned. They've only been tied together as far as the mouse is concerned. So as I drag on the mouse, they move together. Same with resonance. Same with all the other knobs as well. So now with that group on, it's very much feels like a duophonic synthesizer or a big unison synthesizer, because everything is working together, all the voices are working together, and that's much more of a standard way a synthesizer operates. So you can totally get all of those regular synthesizer sounds if that's what you're after. Offset is different. Offset keeps the relative position of each one. So if I change the filter down there and up there, you can see that's up there, down there, put on offset, I can then move them and they stay the same. Do you see? Do you see what I'm saying? They're not coming together for the same value. Changing. So I'll put that somewhere else. Like that. Good. So, some more important things we need to talk about. The sequencer, because this is very much key. I think it's what's defined a lot of its sound. While at the moment we've got a fantastically sounding analog, multi-oscillator, two-voice, strangely independent thing going on. That's lovely. Thank you, Mr. Cockrell. With the sequencer, you can add a lot of movement to that. Now, on the original, I think it was an 8-step sequencer. The TVS Pro has 16 steps, and this is what this has here. You have a separate sequencer for each SEM, which was also nice. So in order to make this happen, we need to change our mode down here again. So we go to a sequence mode. Let's just go for something nice and simple. So at the moment we've got keyboard, go into sequencer A, go into the SEM. Now, that means the sequencer only works when I press a key. But we can start there, shall we? No, let's not start there. Let's do it on its own. So no trigger, mono sequence. And then it's running all by itself. So the sequencer here is a little bit fiddly in the smallness of this, but we can press this button up here to make it a little bit bigger so that we can explore it better. But all of the features are available in the mini version, just more difficult to see. So as you can see, it's going along on C4 at the moment, and you can click in there and drag and it will change to a different note. Just going to go and change us back to a single note as opposed to a fifth. Underneath that you've got gate length. You've also got velocity. And perhaps more interestingly, you've got ratchets. And then you've got pan, so each individual step can be panned differently. You can then shift the sequence, if that's helpful. As an alternative, you can record a sequence in. That's nice. You can also randomize just by clicking one of the buttons here, I think it is. So if I wanted to bring in a sequence to SEM number 2, I could do that by setting up dual sequencers. instead of having it without a trigger, we can have it so it runs on a trigger, which also brings in transposition as well. When you've got two sequences running like this from the keyboard splits into a high and a low, with one being on the other side, which means I can run them independently. So that's the second sem running, whereas that's the other sequence. So now that we've messed around with the sequences, we can then start talking about the mode. Now this is the important thing that does all the routing for you. So as we've looked at this menu a few times now, you can have just a sem running by itself, either one. Which is just lovely. You can have them running in unison, giving you that big sound. You can have them split, which is where you have this keyboard split about here. I think it is. You can probably set it. Can you set it? Yeah, you can set it with that thing there. So you have your two voices completely separately. You can have it in continuous, which if we go back to our sems, you can see which one is being played. So it's one after the other. And that's even if you're playing a legato, it swaps from one to the other. Which is immediately interesting because I've got these two voices running differently, sounding differently, each with their own filter and tuning. It's bizarre. And then you've got Sem 1 and Sem 2 priority. Now what that does is it has the two things there together, sounding one after the other. But if you, I think, it will always play the priority one if it's able to. So it's sticking with Sem 1. And then there's Sem 2, because Sem 1's already playing. Get it? Which is really, really interesting. Then you get sequencer mode, so a mono sequence. That's just the top one. Or with no trigger. Two sequences together, split, high and low. Super. With no trigger, the unison sequencer, so they're playing together from one sequence. That's very nice. And then you've got a mixed, so you can have a sequence going into A, or a sequence going into Sem 1 and Sem 2 not going on. so. And I think you can have it the other way around. Yes. Like so. You're getting the idea, I hope, of how these different modes really interweave to create a different approach to what you're doing. So you have these fantastic ideas that you've got this sequence going on and you've got this lead that you're playing with it, or you've got a bass line that you're playing with a sequence bit over the top, or they're both being sequenced either by themselves, so you can independently just adjust and play with the individual voices to craft that sound you're after, or you can run them together. It gives you so many options, and every time it's sounding like something from a space adventure of prog rock past, and that's just it's all there is. Of course, that's not it, because I've just made this up. Now, there's a lot going on in the preset library. You've got all sorts of stuff going on. I've just sort of played with the main presets really, but there's a heck of a lot of stuff. There's no end to the weirdness. You can also hit the random button. Which you would think gives you just a randomization of all the controls and the parameters. But no, it's a random patch, which is fine. Which is a good way of exploring. I'm always pressing far too many notes. So that, I think, more or less is pretty much it. I mean, the SEM is a simple synthesizer voice, and so there's not a whole lot to go into. And I think where the emphasis is, where the focus is, where the interest is in the TVS Pro is in these different modes, the way these SEMs are connected to each other, respond to each other, and are so fully and determinedly independent. It's that is what gives the TVS Pro something really quite unique, I think. So there you are. I hope you've enjoyed my little exploration into the TVS Pro. It's an odd synthesizer, but odd in all kind of like the good ways. It's not, I think, perhaps going to take you down the normal roads that you go. It's going to find slightly weird avenues. It's going to find stuff that perhaps is unexpected, because you're having to work within the confines of what a SEM can offer, which is an extraordinarily fat, ballsy sound, but with minimal control, with minimal waveforms, with minimal options, just one modulator or two in there, a little bit of change. I mean, what you can really benefit from is the detuning is awesome, and the raw sound of it is really what you're leaning into. And then you have the opportunity to run these two SEMs in different configurations. And that then takes you down another avenue. So you might have started off creating this big fat bass sound, and then you've split one of the SEMs off and you've decided to explore something a bit more leady, a bit more breathy, a bit more noisy. And then perhaps you'll sequence one and discover that actually that's where that should have been all the time. And then you can swap those two over, because you can port one sequence from one sequencer to another and then run the other one off that, while you can go back to playing the bass as you were on the other one. And it's so reactive in that you can play it so that the sequences trigger as you play, and you can explore that underlining drone or that over-the-top lead. And you start finding yourself writing these parts
writing, playing these parts that, as I say, seem to just be pulled from some dim, distant, old prog rock record you found at the back of Oxfam. And you go, "Ooh, I think I like that." Not sure, not entirely sure, because I think in some ways it's an acquired taste, because it doesn't do immediately what you think it should. And so I think in finding the real meat within it might be stepping outside of your normal comfort zone, which is interesting. I would have loved to have a go at the hardware version of this. That would have been quite a thing, I think. It would have been a bit boggling. Because again, you're doing things differently, you're working differently. It's not going to be muscle memory and the usual way of dialing in bits and pieces. I mean, because the envelopes are slightly different. The position of the waveforms is slightly different. That morph between low pass and notch to high pass is slightly different. The use of modulation is slightly different. Everything about it is just a little bit off from what you would normally perhaps expect. And combine that with an interface which seems to be a little bit just designed to annoy you slightly, just enough. I mean, Oberheim probably got there first, and so it's everybody else who's doing it wrong. But for me, because I'm very much used to everything else, there's just, why is that there? It makes me look for soothing somewhere, because it's not where things are supposed to be. Give me a waveform mixer, for heaven's sake, and give me a sine wave. That would be nice. Oh no, you can find a sine wave on LFO3, I suppose. LFO, VCO3, I suppose. So that's a possibility. But it's a sort of synthesizer that inspires conversation, because you're not entirely sure whether it's brilliant entirely or a little bit fudged and ham-fisted, while at the same time producing a fantastic sound. And you kind of trying to decide, is this where I want to spend all my time fiddling around with it? And then you go, God, yes, that sounds enormous. It's just got these balls, if you know what I mean. But it like I say, it sounds like it's within this strange studio space, which I also like. Maybe that's the reverb. Maybe it's not. I don't know. It just has this thing. I think I hear something similar in the Moog Mariana, for instance. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of emulating old analog circuitry to this sort of level, then it really does bring something out, and it's different. It's not like hearing a software synthesizer that's based on a simpler form of emulation, or based on samples or something like that. There's something else. There's the ghost is still in that machine somewhere, even within this software, and that's a fascinating thought. I think it's made my mind go all sort of juicy and wonder about things. I wonder whether I'm doing things right. It also makes me want to go like some kind of 70s/80s sci-fi movie. That's the inspiration. I think that's where it's going to take you ultimately. So there you are. There are some thoughts on the Oberheim TVS Pro as represented and thrown at us from GForce Instruments. Hope that was helpful. In the meantime, go make some tunes.